Okay, so in question 4, we're beginning to look at some issues of contract, and it's asking us which of the following statements is most correct. An offer can be made to the world at large. An offer can be made to an individual person. To have agreement, you need offer, but not necessarily acceptance. Intention to create legal relations is presumed in social domestic relations. A contract is not a legally enforceable agreement. Hopefully some of those will be very, very familiar to you just off the top of your head. But just in case, I'm going to my handy-dandy hint sheet about agreement, intent, and consideration. So we know that a contract is not just a promise, it's a binding promise or a binding agreement. So I hope it's fairly obvious to everyone that a contract is a legally enforceable agreement. That's what we mean by it. If I look at part D here, intention to create legal relations, well, that's actually the next part of the course, isn't it? We have offer and acceptance, then we have intent. So we have offer, acceptance, and intention, right? Social or domestic relationships are presumed to be not enforceable, and that makes a lot of sense, right? In most social or domestic arrangements, you don't intend to be sued if you don't keep your agreement. So is an intention to create legal relationships presumed in social and domestic arrangements? No, it's not. Okay, so both of those are actually no. C, to have agreement, you need offer, but not necessarily acceptance. Technically, that you need something to show that you have agreement. The way that we most often see agreement is with an offer and an acceptance. So I'm not too happy with that, because normally I'm going to want to see an offer and an acceptance. I mean, technically, you might be able to have conduct or showing a meeting of minds without a definitive acceptance. That conduct would be the willingness, but I'm going to go with that's not what they mean here, right? Because for agreement, you're going to need an offer and acceptance. That's normally how we see agreement. B, an offer can only be made to an individual person. Well, you can make an offer to an individual person, but you can also make an offer to a group or to the world at large. So we can see here an offer is a willingness to immediately enter a contract with a target person or persons. So you can make an offer to one person, a group, or the world at large. Okay. So given that, we can see that we know that A is true. An offer can be made to the world at large. We know that that's wrong. That's probably not right. That's wrong. That's wrong. So A is our answer. That's the most correct statement here. Question 5. Dominique has agreed to purchase a 2016 BMW car from her friend Paul for $500. The market value of the car is $60,000. Which of the following statements is most correct? There will not be a valid contract between Dominique and Paul, as the consideration is significantly different from market value. Okay, let's go back to my handy-dandy hint sheet, and we're actually in consideration, right? Which is the payment or promise to pay. Consideration. Now, the rule here is that consideration must be sufficient, but need not be adequate. And you'll remember that what that means is that there must be something, right? There must be some consideration, but it doesn't need to reflect the actual value of the transaction or the deal that you're talking about. So just because $500 isn't worth $60,000 doesn't mean that there isn't enough consideration. In fact, that is appropriate. So the answer A is incorrect. Okay, this will not. The difference in these values will not affect whether there is consideration or not. Okay. B, there will be a valid contract as the laws of contract will substitute a market value of $60,000 for the purchase of the car. No, I don't know where that comes from. There's no substitution of value anywhere. C, there is sufficient consideration to support a contract. Well, there's $500, so yes, it is sufficient. It might not be adequate, right? But remember, for consideration in a contract, it only needs to be sufficient, not necessarily adequate. There needs to be some consideration, which we have. So C seems correct to me. Let's just check the others. Consideration is not required to form a contract where the contract is made between friends. Well, if you're talking about a contract legally enforceable, yeah, you need consideration. There's the exception of a deed. But in general, contracts are going to need, a simple apparent contract is going to need consideration. So that's not true. And in friends, you'd probably even expect it even more because we have the intent problem of social and domestic. So that's not true. E, there's a valid contract, but the contract will be voidable as the consideration is not adequate. No, voidable means that there is a contract and one party can do it. So it implies that there's a lack of consent, like in undue influence or unconscionability. But there is sufficient consideration. So we have a simple apparent contract that would be enforceable and it wouldn't be voidable by one party. That's incorrect too. So yep, question 5, our answer is C. There's sufficient consideration to support a contract. Question 6. On Monday afternoon, a group of friends agree to meet after work on a Friday afternoon for drinks at a local bar. Thomas was not at work on Friday and spent $20 on a taxi to get to the bar. When Thomas gets there, his friends are not there as they changed their mind and decided to go out on Saturday evening. Which of the following statements is most correct? Thomas can get compensation from his friends as there was a binding contract to go out on Friday. Okay, so contract needs agreement, intent, consideration. I hope you can see already that we're going to have a problem with intent here. Why? Because under intent, we know that social and domestic arrangements, it's presumed, right, that you don't want it to be legally enforceable. Now, you can rebut that, you can argue against that, only if there are serious consequences, by things like winning large amounts of money, or the timing of the rationale of the arrangement suggests differently. I actually think if a reasonable person looking at the perspective from an objective observer, they'd be saying people didn't want to get sued if they didn't turn up to drinks. That's ridiculous. That's a social domestic style. That's not true. B, Thomas is not able to get compensation for his friends as, although the agreement was in a business context, the presumption has been rebutted. Well, I know they're at work, but it's with a group of friends, right? So it's really social and domestic. So I don't think that's the right answer because it's about a social domestic relationship here. C, as there is a voidable contract between Thomas and his friends, Thomas has no right to compensation. Well, there is no contract, right? Because there's no intent. So there's not a voidable with no contract of any kind because there's a lack of intent here. So C is incorrect. Thomas can get compensation from his friends as there was a non-binding agreement. If you have a non-binding agreement, you can't enforce getting this compensation. So, that's incorrect too. E, Thomas is not able to get compensation from his friends as the agreement was in a social context and the presumption cannot be rebutted. I mean, again, I think that, I hopefully have been through that already, but yeah, that would be the best answer for mine. So I'd be going 6E is my answer here.